Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I'm Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Alexandra of the Middle-Sized Garden vlog.
So there you go.
Now, we do post every week, so hit subscribe if you want to know our continuing adventures and possibly other wonderful guests. But Stephen, what are we going to do today?
Well, you've all asked for it and you're going to get it. We're going to talk about the garden, as in mine, and we're going to talk about lots of things about the garden, but Alexandra is actually going to sort of lead the conversation a bit because you've got some questions you wanted to ask us about.
So Alexandra then, what are the things that have struck you about this garden that you want to know more about?
Well, I've been to this garden several times and I've done quite a few videos about it. And one of the things that really strikes me is it's very much a plantsman's garden, isn't it, Stephen?
One would say that.
It's packed with plants and trees, and we can't really tell where the garden begins and ends. And of course, this is a fantastic tip. If you've got a small garden, we're always saying, well, pack it with plants and then people will blur the boundaries. But actually, I can't even feel how big this garden is, what shape it is or where it goes to. So I'd really like you and Stephen to take me round, literally all the way round, pointing out the shape and the size.
Excellent. Other things?
Well, I'm quite impressed that Stephen has a very low use of hard landscaping. There
you go.
Who'd have thought?
There are little terraces,
Yeah.
there are some harder paths, there's some gravel paths, there's quite a lot of mulch paths, and I think that's really interesting because a mulch path is cheap and it's biodegradable, and you obviously do have to top it up a bit, but it's very flexible. So I think that's a really interesting thing.
Okay, we should look at that. Next.
Views and vistas.
Aha.
Now, everyone, when they're talking about garden design, says, what about the views and vistas? And actually, I've talked to Stephen about this before, and he has a slightly different angle on views and vistas from what most people do. So it'd be really interesting to see the views and vistas.
Okay, and finally,
there is that sloping succulent roof. Now, I have seen flat succulent roofs, but of course sloping succulent roofs are so gorgeous because you can actually see them. You don't have to go up close and sort of peer over them.
Yes, we'll go up onto the second story and
Look down, exactly. But I think, and I've watched your video on it, and I was really impressed, but then I decided it wasn't going to be for me. But I'd love to know more about
whether it still is for you.
Yes, yeah, I can take you through all the warts and all on that one.
Well, that sounds like a plan. I think we should not beat around the bush, but
Well, actually,
go and
we
take a
should
walk
beat
around the bush.
Yes,
come on,
let's go.
Let's go. Well, here we are then. So this is the entry point. There's the house. Here's the drive. What are your thoughts?
Well, Stephen, I can barely see the house and I'm only a few feet away from it.
What are you hiding?
Yeah, well, it is one of those things. I think this place works really well at Halloween. There's the reveal when children arrive. But yes, the house, we love the house, but we don't necessarily want it to be the dominant feature on the block. Most people seem to want to show off their houses and they forget the garden should pull the house into the garden. So we've done that.
Tell me, how big is this garden, for
All right.
example?
Well,
What's its shape? Sorry.
Yeah, its shape is actually sort of reverse battle axe shaped in a sense. It's broader at the front and then there's a piece at the back. So it's sort of like an inverted T, I suppose you'd call it. And it's grown over the years. So it started as a quarter-acre block. We then acquired some unused road reserve between us and the next door neighbour. And then, like the Mogul hordes, we took over the next door neighbour as well. And then we eventually added another piece of road reserve behind, hence the sort of handle bit on the battle axe. So we think we're working on around about an acre.
Is that a middle-sized garden, Alexandra?
Well, funnily enough, Matthew, it is.
So you can stay.
I can
We're
stay.
not ruining the
I know.
concept.
I was worried he was going to say, and then we bought a bit more. At the back.
Oh, that hasn't as yet happened.
No, it's not middle-sized enough. No, as far as I'm concerned, middle-sized is larger than a courtyard, but smaller than an acre.
Aha. So in your experience, because you have seen a lot of middle-sized gardens, do you think this has a unique quality then in terms of that spatial relationship and how you get a sense or not of the scale of it?
I think it's a really brilliant example of how if you just pack in plants and blur the boundaries, you could be in a small garden or a larger garden. You just have this sense of privacy, of jungle, of greenery, and it being your own space. You know, you don't see, I mean, you hardly see Stephen's house, but you certainly can't see the neighbours.
No.
No,
Which
well,
is another interesting point, is it not?
That is the plan, so it's working. You know, one thing, that's the important thing. And yes, it is, it's about packing in as much as possible. I see a piece of bare ground as a waste of space. So I don't have extensive lawns, I have narrow paths, the whole point being that I want to get as many plants as possible into the setting, but I also want them to sort of some way or another marry together. So they have to actually work together. It's not just a matter of, you could go out to a nursery, fill up a trolley, bring it home, whack them all in the ground, and in a sense you could create the same thing I have, but it hasn't got the same sense of purpose, which is important for me.
Talking of purpose then, I think we should continue our tour and see more and start to talk about vistas and the fact that you can't see the neighbours.
Yes, all right, let's go.
Let's go. Alexandra, I'm sensing a vista.
Well,
Do you approve?
I do approve. I think it's a lovely vista. But Stephen, what's your view on vistas and views? Because I'm not sure that that's really what you've been thinking about.
I have to say there are limited vistas in a garden when it's small. So it's very hard to make use of a vista per se.
This is a middle-sized garden though, isn't it, Alexandra?
Yes.
Middle-sized garden.
All right, well,
Not small, Stephen.
depends on your perspective. So this gave us an opportunity to create a small vista because we've got a fairly narrow but long piece of land, house quite close by, and we wanted to create a surprise. So you come in from the hedge at the bottom and suddenly the vista opens up to you. Our little garden shed was built specifically in that spot so that the door from this angle would be the central piece for the vista, because at the end of a vista you always have to have something to catch your eye. So
I'm desperate to go through the white door, are you?
so we've done that, and in fact at the back of the house we've also got the same issue where we've got a narrow long piece of ground. We've created a dead straight path, and we made sure that the window in the side of the shed was exactly in the middle of the view. So, and if you turn around and go the other way, we have a bench at the end of the view. So there's always something to catch your eye on these sort of straight long bits, and it's the only part of the garden where we've created fairly formal sort of vistas. So there you go, that is almost my only vista.
Just while we're here, I just wanted to point out that this arch, where you're just growing, clematis over it and grapes over it and everything, actually it makes it very private in terms of the house next door.
It does.
Because I'm certainly in the UK, obviously I'm based in the UK normally, very thrilled to be over here in Australia, but we have a lot of density of housing, so privacy is a huge issue, and we're not allowed to build very high fences or hedges. But actually this arch system along the side of your boundary is definitely a way of not exactly concealing the next door house, but actually just once again making it less obvious. You look at the arches, you don't look at the next door house.
You might have opened a can of worms here too, because I have some very serious things to say about arches. Arches.
Are we settled?
Yeah, you ready for this? Arches need to be big and substantial if they're going to work. There's nothing worse than taking your knuckles off when you go through with the wheelbarrow. So we've got lovely big wide arches so that there's ample space. They also need to be reasonably tall so that plant material can hang through them and not whack you in the face as you walk through. And they need to actually be purposeful. An arch standing in the middle of a garden that you can walk around either side of it then loses any point whatsoever. So you need to think of those things when you put an arch in the garden.
The philosophy of Mr. Ryan. None of these things I have to say I've ever thought about, so this is fascinating.
There you go. But yes, they do have to be done properly. These we got made at a local engineering works because they're not something you could just go to the local big barn and buy something of this scale. So we had to get them made.
Always good to remember. Well, I think we should go and look at the other vistas that Stephen mentioned now, because I'm intrigued about these windows and alignments.
All right, let's go.
Onwards.
This away. All right, Alexandra, if you fight your way along this little jungle path here, this will bring us to the shed again from the other angle and the window that is central to the actual vista.
And I think I spot this sloping succulent roof, which just looks fantastic. I mean, I've seen lots of succulent roofs that are flat, but this is so beautiful, but I gather it was awfully hard work to do.
Don't go there.
Well, you have got a video about it, so people could check that out.
Yes, they could.
But, well, Stephen, tell me about the succulent roof, but one of the things I'm really noting is that we have most of these succulents in the UK, and it's quite interesting that I'm from the UK, roughly equates to a USDA hardiness zone of 9, because our winters are about, never go colder really than -6 Celsius, 21 Fahrenheit. We don't have the hot summers you have. You have much hotter summers. You have kind of quite cool winters around here.
Yes.
And yet we're, you know, halfway across the world, but we're all growing the same plants.
Yep, and many of the succulents I grow, of course, people forget that not all succulents come from deserts. A lot of succulents come from mountain zones. So quite a number of these are actually alpines. So in fact, they cope very well with the cold in the winter, particularly the sempervivums and their ilk, because they do come from the mountains. But they're also comparatively heat tolerant. So although this actual roof faces slightly south, so it doesn't get a lot of the blasting sun on it. So it actually works a bit better that way. I think if I had it on a north-facing roof, I might have to irrigate my succulents far more. These haven't been watered all summer. We've had a coolish summer, but they've done really well, and the natural rain has been enough.
And of course, taking that you're in the southern hemisphere, south-facing is the same to us as north-facing it is. So what you're actually saying is, if you're going to do a succulents roof, don't put it in the really sunny-facing.
Not in Australia anyway. I think that would be pushing it, particularly a sloping roof like this one. If it's a flattish roof, then your medium tends to hold a bit more moisture. But on a sloping roof like this, it's extremely well drained, so it doesn't hold much moisture up there. So there's the disadvantages of the slope are actually partially the putting it in place, but also the management afterwards can be a bit of an issue. So I sometimes have to water my roof, funnily enough.
That's awful.
Yes.
What a terrible thing. In terms of the practicalities, I gather it is a bit more complicated than a flat roof one. I mean, it's...
You could say that, Alexandra, but it's a little complicated to go into in this video. But if people are interested, we did do a video on the succulent roof, and so we will slot in the link that you need to go and have a look at that video, and that will give you all of the putting it together warts and all.
Now, Alexandra, you made a very interesting point about the hard landscaping, or in fact the lack of, in Stephen's garden, which I'd never really thought about. And here we are, gravel path, mulch path. So what were your thoughts about that? Why is that so interesting to you?
Well, because in southeast England, there's really quite a lot of density of populations. And actually, the houses are Victorian and sometimes Georgian, or even earlier where I live. So everybody's left their garden paths. If you use stone, if you use concrete, if you use brick, then somehow they just get buried. And meanwhile, you can be digging up your garden and wondering why a plant doesn't do well there. And it's because some leftover stone or brick from 100 years ago, or some path that someone made, is there. So I really like this light effect on the landscaping, because both the gravel and the mulch will slowly just actually work their way into the soil. They won't leave a permanent record, and it just seems to me a very friendly way of doing.
Well, and look, to be honest with you,
thinking of being friendly, Stephen?
Possibly in a sort of subconscious way more than anything else, because the materials I've used for paths, I mean, I use a lot of mulch paths because I can then recycle the mulch into garden beds when it gets thick and rots down. So I see that as part of my recycling.
And we actually made a video about, and actually I did steal your idea, Alexandra, about the sustainability of your garden. And we do talk about the paths, so we'll link that below.
Now, the gravel paths have a slightly different aspect to them. They're more expensive to put down, obviously. They make a nice crunchy noise when you walk on them.
Which we love.
Yep, but from our perspective here, a lot of our gravel paths are closer to buildings and houses because it gives us a non-burnable surface close to buildings. So, you know, when you're in a bushfire-prone area, I mean, I'm not altogether sure that our place will ever be saved by gravel paths, but it just gives you that little bit of a sense of more security. So I put the gravel paths closer to the house.
Not something you have to consider in Kent.
Well, no.
Ravaging bushfires.
Ravaging bushfires. But security from gravel, because of course people put gravel close to the house in Britain because it's actually quite a good burglar deterrent. Because the sound of feet crunching across gravel theoretically would wake you up. I'm not, once again, entirely sure. I would rely on it.
The peer-reviewed paper on that.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. There might be some very, very lightly walking burglars still out there anyway. But
I must say, though, that the notion of digging up and finding the remnants of a previous garden, I find that romantic, but I can imagine from your perspective, it's deeply annoying.
Well, particularly when it's not a romantic piece of York stone, it's a bit of concrete that's been, you know, the cheapest and most horrible paver you could imagine. And it's just a lump of concrete and it's 4 feet down and it's quite difficult to get back up again. So it is really something.
Right.
But the thing I also liked about the mulch paths you were saying earlier is that they're very flexible. If a plant grows over, instead of having to cut the plant back, you just detour the path.
You can, in fact, and that's what I like about my paths, is that if I've got a valuable plant, I don't necessarily want to hack it back. It may not, in fact, respond to pruning all that terribly well, and so I've basically ruined the plant. So I've got
By
choices.
planting it in the wrong place.
Yeah, no, not necessarily, because I see a garden as evolving and changing. I don't see a garden as being set as such. So it's a journey. So some plants are at some point or another going to get bigger than you want. So I can either move the path, or I can in fact take out the plant if it's growing too big. So I've actually got options which a lot of other people may not have. They may have to hack the plant back or take it out. I can just move the path, and that for me works really well, particularly if it's a valuable plant.
The other thing about paths too is drama and theatricality, and it leads you on to new discoveries, does it not?
Well, that's what a path is all about, is to take you somewhere. So a path should in fact lead you in a garden.
Well, we should take the advice and be led on to the next reveal.
Let's do it.
Onwards and upwards.
Now, Alexandra, another thing that I think is really important when it comes to vistas and their ilk are in fact the reveal. And that's what I've tried to create here. By coming up this hidden path, you suddenly come out and there is my major pond.
It's fantastic. And there's a great sense of destination, isn't there? Because I may be imagining this, but I think this is at the back of the garden, isn't it? I mean, because you've got these paths winding everywhere and you've got so much vegetation, there's not a sense of what shape the garden is.
Yep.
But you feel as if there's just another adventure. And, oh, what's around there? Oh, it's the pond. So that works really well, I think.
It does. In fact, it tickles the fancy of children of all ages, really. So what can I say? That's what it should be about, is the surprise.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for showing me round, and next time you must come to England and see round the middle-sized garden.
Yes,
what a good
I'm booking
idea.
the tickets already, and thank you for your insights. It's been so interesting, I think, to look at the garden from your perspective and talk about these things, which I think our viewers are going to love.
I hope so. And don't forget, we post every week. So please come on board, subscribe and press the alert button so that you can keep up with what we're doing.
And if you want to find Alexandra's channel, it is
The Middle-Sized Garden.
And Alexandra has been so kind and generous since we actually started our video in helping us with information, tips and support. So thank you, Alexandra, for that way back in the beginning. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
All right. Goodbye all.